Hi, everybody. Thank you, Keith. Thanks for having me. A great crowd here. I'm glad to be here. And I was at the CWNP conference about 4 weeks ago and spoke, and Keith just looked at me and goes, I'm going to make you the keynote. And I thought he was kidding. And then I showed up last night, and I looked at the list, and I'm the keynote. I'm quite honored. I've tried to make the first three of these, and unfortunately, all three times Aerohive was sending me some of the more glorious cities like Detroit, Michigan, to do training sessions, so I could not make any of those first three events, but luckily I was already over here teaching some CWNA classes actually for Aerohive and Aerohive partners. So I made a point of making sure that I could be here. So I'm very honored and humbled to be here. So the topic I've chosen to talk about is Internet of Things from a design, security, and administrative perspective. And really what I'm going to talk about here over the next 45 or so minutes is just kind of where I see things headed. And I don't have a crystal ball by any means. If I did, I'd be investing a lot heavier in stocks. But I've seen the industry change over the years, and seen things change constantly. And a lot of times we think things are going to work a certain way, and then we're completely surprised it's completely different. Probably the best example was when 802.11n was being first ratified. Everybody was thinking, yeah, it's going to work this way and that way. And then when the technology actually came out, a lot of things were different and a lot of things we weren't expecting. And even a lot of things that were in that amendment that never even actually became deployed and are still changing as we progress into 802.11ac. And I kind of view this as well. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more here in a minute, and then after that we'll get into this. But in my mind, this is kind of a new brave new world with Wi-Fi. It's the whole Internet of Things. We'll be covering these topics right here, and let's just start with an introduction. So if you don't know me, Keith already introduced myself. My name is David Coleman. I'm the global or senior mobility leader for Aerohive Networks, which is just a BS name that my boss and I came up with. It really doesn't mean anything. I'm involved with the Knowledge Services Department. I work very close with Gregor and Marco over there in trying to spread education from in the Aerohive world. I'm also CWNE number 4, and there's my Twitter address. It's at Mr. Multipath, so if you don't follow me, please do. So, because at the end of this week, I want to have 5,000 followers, just like Keith. Please follow me. It's just at Mr. Multipath. As Keith mentioned, I'm the co-author of this study guide right here. The study guide sells about 5,000 to 8,000 copies a year. And I want to reiterate what Keith was saying about blogging and writing. When I first wrote this book, the first edition of it like 12, 13 years ago, I kind of did it for myself. And I continue to write books and blogs and white papers. And I absolutely do it not just to spread the education, but also for myself. This is an 800-page beast, and I can't remember everything in it. So half the time, when I'm trying to reference something about Wi-Fi, I have to go look at it myself. So writing will do wonders for your career, by the way, as well. And even if it's something as simple as a blog or participating on Twitter. So I highly encourage everybody to do that. Coming soon is the second edition of the CWSP study guide. You can pre-order it on Amazon, and once again, I'll make like 50 cents on it, but this will be out Q1 of next year. So let's go ahead and get into the topic, Internet of Things. So, in IT and in lots of industries, there's lots of catchphrases, and that's what this is. It's kind of a catchphrase. And, I've heard it called other things, Internet of Everything, Internet of Things. I know when I got into IT many moons ago, back when I was still young, Gregor, when I was still young, and IP4 was kind of new too, and they were already worried about IP addresses running out, and they were telling everybody, hey, we're going to be moving to IPv6, which that didn't really happen way back then, but it's happening now. and it's actually relative to this topic. But there was a big marketing initiative at the time called "There's going to be an IP address in everything." There's going to be an IP address in your refrigerator, your dishwasher, your shoes. There'll be an IP address in everything. And the thinking was, especially in your house, putting and all your appliances, because the thinking was Ethernet was kind of still relatively new, and they were going to wire everything, and you were going to have a completely wired house, and so you'd have a house where it was IP of everything. Well, that failed miserably. It just didn't happen because people weren't wiring their houses, and new homes maybe, but it just didn't catch on. It is coming back, and the whole IP in everything is now part of this, the Internet of Things. And you're going to see here in a minute, like everything, it's actually starts out on the consumer side of things. It's consumer driven, but then it makes its way into the enterprise. So the whole concept of there's going to be an IP address and everything actually is going to, in my mind, is going to happen in the next coming years. Now, we've all seen these stats, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we've seen the Gartner stats before and the predictions, and they're basically saying that Gartner is estimating by 2020 there could be as many as 26 billion IoT devices connected to the internet. A good portion of those are going to be wireless. There are wired IT of things as well. There's still wires out there, believe it or not. It's not everything's wireless. But a good chunk of these, because of the low power consumption and the low cost of the radios, these things are definitely going to be wireless, and it's not just going to be in the home market, it's definitely going to be in the enterprise. Now, as a matter of fact, and it'll far exceed, by the way, it'll far exceed all the tablets and PCs and cell phones or smartphones that are out there. Now, as a matter of fact, I was going to make some slides showing you all the different verticals where IoT can make sense in the enterprise. And I decided against that because you've probably seen a lot of these marketing slides before, but just briefly, the possibilities are endless. If you want to really think about it, the first IoT vertical in the enterprise is probably healthcare, because there's already lots of machines and the IV pumps and the patient monitoring devices in healthcare that have, talking back to the nurse stations, that already have Wi-Fi radios in them, and that's actually been around for a long time. But you're going to see lots more verticals. You start to see them in HVAC systems to monitor temperatures and air pressure and humidity. Any kind of industry, manufacturing, sensor devices, we could go down every single vertical, from energy to healthcare to manufacturing and on and on. The possibilities are endless, and it will be application driven too, and we'll talk more about that. So in my mind, in the year 2020, this is where we're going to be at. So one of my favorite 1980s movies is The Terminator. And if you remember, the machines took over, and a big part of IoT is machine-to-machine communications. So, you know, who knows, with smart intelligence and everything, we might actually be headed there. Now, when you think of the Internet of Things, and you need to think moving on in terms of a wireless LAN and IoT in the enterprise. What will happen by 2020, and is already on our way there, is the IoT, the machines that are connecting to your wireless LAN, will far surpass human beings connected to your wireless LAN. I mean, right now human beings are connected to the wireless LAN through a majority of devices, and most of you guys have 5 or 6 Wi-Fi devices. Gregor probably has 10. That on him right now, but that's just because he's an uber geek. It won't just be people trying to connect and interface on the internet and with corporate networks with their devices. It'll be machines, and the machines are going to outnumber us. Okay? And so how are we going to deal with that? Wireless LAN administrators are going to have to confront these new design challenges as we move into this IoT world. And we're going to have to hire basically Sarah Connor as your administrator to deal with this, because it is kind of a brave new world moving forward. Okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of wireless devices very briefly, and then I just want to talk, and then I want to focus on the challenges with IoT. So this is another catchphrase, the consumerization of IT, which is once again used to describe the shift in IT technology as it moves from basically the home market into the enterprise market and government markets. And basically what it is, employees like a technology that they're using at their house, and they decide that they want to have it at work too. And so it's consumer driven. And if you think about it, that's how Wi-Fi made it into the enterprise, because of this. Rogue APs. If you think about it, going back into the early days of Wi-Fi, nobody wanted to put in Wi-Fi. Because it wasn't secure, and at the time there was big security issues, and we all know that pre-2004. But what did everybody do? Everybody brought the Linksys, their D-Link, and they plugged it in and said, I'll show that IT administrator, I'm going to have my Wi-Fi. And they got their Wi-Fi, whether the IT administrator wanted it or not. And then everybody, basically, the enterprise had to deal with it. They were forced to deal with it. So it was actually consumer driven. They brought it into the enterprise. Well, the same thing can be said about other Wi-Fi technologies as well. So if you look at kind of the history of Wi-Fi client devices, it actually wasn't consumer driven to begin with. In the very early days, it was mostly frequency hopping stuff, and it was mostly scan guns used for data collection in warehouse and manufacturing environments. But then came the laptops, because it was consumer driven. Everybody wanted to get connected to the internet through their corporate wireless LAN, even though they didn't have a corporate wireless LAN. And once they did, they brought in their laptops. Then these came, okay? And once again, most of you probably have at least 2 of these that you're carrying with you in addition to your laptop. Then there's the wearable devices. Now, I have an asterisk next to that, and the reason I have an asterisk is a couple of things. I really haven't seen, I don't think many of you have either, and contradict me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen, or disagree with me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen a lot of wearable devices actually connecting to enterprise wireless LANs yet. Probably the exception of that is the little Voicera Wi-Fi badges that are used in healthcare. But the Apple Watches and the Fitbits and a lot of these, and Google Glass, I guess, is on hold. A lot of these wearables really aren't connecting to the enterprise yet. Now, that might change, but even if they're not connecting to your enterprise wireless LAN, they're still in the environment and they're eating up airtime. And one thing that I talk about all the time now, it's all about airtime consumption. And so even if there's these wireless devices that are just doing peer-to-peer or ad hoc in your area, they actually affect your wireless LAN. And then this is the next step, IoT devices. And once again, I have an asterisk next to that because IoT devices in the enterprises is not gigantic yet, but it's getting ready to spread like wildfire, and that's what everybody's predicting. And I tend to agree with predictions. Now, quickly, one more little history lesson, and then we'll move on here. Once again, just to show you that these things actually took a while before they really caught on. And I mean, now they're just a fact of life, the smartphones and the tablets, but they've actually been around for a while. The first iPhone was introduced in June of 2007. Steve Jobs introduced the iPad in the year 2010. The first Android smartphone debuted in October 2008, but now, and this happened about 2 years ago, in the enterprise, smart devices exceed connectivity to your enterprise wireless LAN over laptops. So there's more of these type of devices exceeding connectivity than laptops on enterprise wireless LANs, not just home wireless LANs. And the next thing that's going to happen, pardon me, is Internet of Things will start exceeding these things. And so think about it. Before, we used to just have one device. And then you had, you got the tablets, and then you had, most people have 3 devices, unless you're Greg, where you have 8. And then you had the wearables, so maybe you have another device or 2. So now you're up to 4 or 5 devices per user, and then now the machines are coming, okay? So, and so that's why we need to start thinking about, okay, how are we going to deal with this? I mean, these are low cost, most of these are very low cost, low power, but radios. It means there's going to be millions and billions of these things connecting to wireless LANs and to the internet. The problem is because they're low cost and low power radios, that could also cause some of the problems. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about it from 3 perspectives. And first, let's talk about from a wireless LAN design perspective. So one thing that we really got to give hands up to Keith about is all you ever hear out of Keith is design, design, design. And we should all be preaching that, because if you're not designing wireless LANs properly in advance, well, most of you guys are probably making money after the fact because you're fixing it. And so there's new challenges that I think we're going to see with IoT and wireless LANs. So most of you know this, 2.4 gigahertz. So let's talk about our friend 2.4 gigahertz. It's basically a disaster zone, okay? You've heard a lot of lectures about this. I think the first heard people saying 2.4 gigahertz is dead. And then I think Von Naj said 2.4 gigahertz is on life support. And then I saw a presentation by Joel Crane from MetaGeek where he said 2.4 gigahertz is a bunch of zombies. And to me, it's just a disaster zone. It's a complete disaster. You guys know all this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. There's only 3 usable channels. It's almost impossible to prevent co-channel interference, CCI. It's pretty much impossible. The SNR is way, way higher than it is on 5 gigahertz. There's an oversaturation of 802.11 devices, and then you have all the non-802.11 transmitting devices. Now, here's the issue. Most of the IoT chipsets and stuff right now, guess what frequency they're on? 2.4 gigahertz only. And that's going to be a whole host of problems. And I was talking with Marco about this last night, and he's like, there's some people that are saying, yeah, IoT is going to be the savior of 2.4 gigahertz. Yeah, it's a disaster zone, okay? I mean, it better be a really good savior, okay? Because it's basically a nightmare. So, whether it's IoT or whatever, 5 gigahertz is the future. I mean, here's all our 5 gigahertz channels now. Obviously, you guys don't have Uni 3 over here. And then there's more in the way. The FCC in the United States, as most of you know, has proposed having these new channels. All the spectrum agencies talk to each other, which means you'll probably get a good portion of these channels over here eventually as well, meaning we need more frequency space, and 5 gigahertz is the way to go. There's more channels, the SNR is lower, and there's not near the interfering devices. It's the future of Wi-Fi, and not just for IoT. So, I'm stealing this from Keith. I saw him at the CWNP conference, and he talked about how he gets customers to take a pledge now that moving forward, they will not deploy 2.4 gigahertz radios. Okay? So everybody stand up. Come on. Everybody stand up. I want you to put your hand over your head and raise your arm and take this pledge. I hereby solemnly pledge not to deploy 2.4 gigahertz radios if at all possible. Okay, you can sit down now. Okay. Keith, I've stolen this from you, so the last couple of classes that I've taught, I've made everybody stand up and take that pledge. And here's the sad thing. Well, some people don't want to take it. That's the sad thing. So it's up to us to educate them and make them take that pledge, including we really, as an industry, I don't know how we're going to do this, but as an industry, we need to put pressure on the chipset manufacturers that are going to be making these devices IoT devices to make 5 gigahertz radios. And not only that, for your customers as well. If you have a customer and they're in like a vertical like healthcare or market, let's just say manufacturing, and they're going to have a bunch of sensors, you need to make sure that the chipsets hopefully are 5 gigahertz. But the problem is there just aren't really a lot of them yet with IoT. So we're going to have to hope for that. So you need to, hopefully, life is going to be a lot better if IoT devices are on 5 gigahertz. And also we need to ensure that they support the DFS channels. Now, and as I said, sadly, most of these devices currently, but hopefully things will change, most IoT radios are only 2.4 gigahertz. I think it's both. I think honestly, I think it's more out of financial. Okay, it's cheap. They can make cheap radios really fast and cheap. But you know, with time, things hopefully. But I don't know about ignorance. I would have to say it's more about financial. You know, and battery. Okay, and battery. So I mean, without a doubt. Now, cheap IoT radios, not only are they sometimes just 2.4 gigahertz, they just support 802.11b data rates. And I've even some that only support data rates of 1 and 2 megabits per second. Now, it's all about airtime consumption. Okay, if you have a bunch of slow devices out there that are only transmitting at 1, 2, 5, 5, or even 11, they're dragging everybody else down. Yes, sir? Well, I'm so glad you asked that. I'm not very confident at the moment. Because you're going to see here in a minute, not only do we want them we don't want them to be A radios, we want them to be MIMO radios, okay? And which means for a lot of reasons, including, but once again, it's all about power. Now, there are some chipsets, though, that are supporting N right now, but it's only 2.4 gigahertz. And there's actually some that are A, but they're not MIMO. Okay, so hopefully that'll change, but that's the problem. A lot of it's power and cost, because if they're going to consume more power, they're going to have to be more robust, and they're going to cost more too. So that is an issue. But I don't know if anybody saw last week. If you ever seen the movie Back to the Future, last week there was a day, it was Back to the Future Day, where Marty McFly, it was actually the 30 years later. That day actually happened last week from Back to the Future 2. So there was a lot of media going on around about it. So where we're headed, though, we don't need 802.11b. I actually stole that from Martin. He's here in the room somewhere. He actually sent that as a Twitter message. But you need to be aware of that. If you have these devices, they're going to be bringing your whole network down. Okay? Now, what about multipath? Okay? So most IoT devices are using non-MIMO radios, okay? Because once again, it's about the power consumption. If they use MIMO radios, they're going to consume more power because they need more processing. Multipath becomes our enemy again, you know? Now, this is a good thing for me because I'm Mr. Multipath, but you got to think about this. I mean, when 802.11n came around, my whole way of thinking and designing and even learning and teaching myself, I had to completely relearn Wi-Fi, because for years and years and years we taught multipath, bad, bad, bad. Here's how we designed to deal with it. Okay, now it's multipath in most cases, good, good, good. Well, now we're maybe back to bad, bad, bad. Okay, so in high multipath environments, they could still have an impact on non-MIMO clients, such as IoT sensors. So this is like an Amiga sensor right here, and it's a ABG. It's an ABG, but it's non-MIMO. So it's both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, but it's non-MIMO. And this thing that takes temperature readings and pressure readings and humidity readings. Now. The bad news for IoT clients that are most of them are non-MIMO. The other bad news is that these non-MIMO IoT clients will be negatively impacted when receiving downstream transmissions from APs, even if they're in or AC APs. In high multipath environments, you can have some inter-symbol interference on the receiving side and thus data corruption, which then is going to cause retransmissions, and that's bad, as we all know. The good news is MIMO APs that support maximum ratio combining, that basically try to put everything back in phase on the receiving side. This is a form of receive diversity, MIMO diversity. It'll still be good for like legacy clients or IoT clients going upstream. And luckily, most IoT communications currently are upstream, okay, because they're sensor devices, which is kind of different than you normally think of Wi-Fi, where most of it's downstream. Most of this is upstream. But it's all application driven, so that could change. As things progress and we start getting more robust applications on these devices, there will be more downstream as well. And then multipath is, once again, our enemy. But upstream, not so bad. Downstream, definitely bad if they have their non-MIMO radios. So what do? Do we go back to designing like we used to? To cut down on reflections and multipath by using a lot of unidirectional antennas in high multipath areas. A lot of these IoT devices only have a single antenna, may not even be any kind of antenna diversity, not even simple switch diversity. So how are we going to go back to the old ways of designing to try to prevent multipath? Well, you know what? Life will be a lot better if these devices, most of them will be one by one, but hopefully they're MIMO. Meaning they're not going to do things like spatial multiplexing, but if they support other types of both transmit and receive MIMO diversity, like space-time block coding and MRC, the space-time block coding coming down from the AP will put redundant copies of the data, will mean there'll be more data resiliency on the receiving side, even though it's only one antenna. And then the MRC helps put a lot of that stuff back in phase and put it all back together. So if the chipsets support that, things will be better. And the good news is, this is one of the most common ones from these guys, and it looks like I spelled it wrong. Okay, I'll be fixing that before I email that to you, Keith. How do you pronounce this again, Marco? It's Arduino. They're Italian chipset manufacturer, I guess, Italian company. They make this chip, this IoT chip that has a Wi-Fi built into it right away, and it's being used for a lot of prototypes, for example. And it's actually not just in prototypes, it's actually being finally put into a lot of final products. And you can find them at this web address, but they are BGN. Now, they're only 2.4 gigahertz, but they do support space-time block coding and STPC. So that's a good thing, and that's what we need. Yes, sir?
So if they support MRC and STPC, does that mean they don't need receive diversity antennas? Can you,
David, since we don't have the throw-box microphone, can you repeat the question for the recording?
Okay. So the question was, so they don't support they support space-time block coding and MRC. Does that mean they don't need diversity antennas, multiple antennas? Well, those types of diversity would be better if you had multiple antennas, but it doesn't mean that that diversity still doesn't work. So like MRC, especially on the receiving side, MRC is all about phase and trying to put the stuff that's kind of out of phase back together. So especially on the receiving side. On the transmit side, yeah, it's really, I'm not really sure how that comes into play on the receiving side. I have to think about it on the transmit side because you're only really sending one stream of data.
A lot of them would be too small to have, you know, the 2.4 wavelength to be able to handle diversity antennas.
Yeah, that's the problem because you're going to have like a half wavelength of separation, you know, so that's going to be the problem. Yes, sir? MRC with a single antenna. It's my understanding a lot of MRC is in the chipset itself and not necessarily in the, not just on on the processor. You're going to still hear. It actually combines multiple paths, and it's kind of like the biggest analogy of MRC. I'm trying to think of the analogy I used to use for MRC, but so much like transmit beamforming, it's all about trying to get everything to arrive in phase. MRC, it's about you can actually listen and you can hear things that are out of phase and hopefully put them back together within a certain interval. So it's my understanding, yes. It's not just multiple antennas. Okay. Look, the Wi-Fi Alliance has certified that device for MRC, and I mean they got the Wi-Fi Alliance 802.11 in certificate, and that's something they test.
Yeah. So it's the phase, it's the time. So you get multi-path bouncing around the same signal coming into one antenna at different times, and it's a combination in the software at the back end that combines all the different times into one single output. So it is one of them.
Yep. Okay. Now, let's think about this. So, multi-user MIMO. Okay. So, everybody here, probably, hopefully you know what multi-user MIMO is. It's all about an AP, an 802.11 AC AP, being able to transmit to multiple clients at the same time downstream. Now, in the coming year, all the wireless LAN vendors are going to market the hell out of you. And all you're going to hear in 2016 is multi-user MIMO, multi-user MIMO, multi-user MIMO, and my company included, okay? And it's going to tell you it's the greatest things ever. I'm a big believer in prove it. Okay, so right now, everybody is working on their next generation or ACAPs with the multi-user MIMO chip, first generation of multi-user MIMO chipsets. Arrow will have them just like Ruckus and Aruba and everybody else. But I'm skeptical about multi-user MIMO for a lot of reasons. Because it requires that there be distance between the clients. It also it requires explicit transmit beamforming, which means that works best at medium range and not at close range or long range. And it also requires the clients to support explicit transmit beamforming. So a couple of problems there. Let's just forget about IoT for the moment. How many clients support explicit transmit beamforming right now? One, two, a couple, Now that'll change with time, but right now, hardly any support it. And, I'm just thinking ahead with multi-user MIMO, if you need medium distance and spacing with everybody, would it work in here? With everybody so close to each other, or would it work in a classroom? A lot of this, to me, I don't really see that working that well. And once again, so they have to have distance from each other. They have to support transmit beamforming, and they have to be at medium range. So we'll see. I'm just spitballing here, but maybe, just maybe, in some verticals, in some environments, this might be a good thing if IoT devices eventually support explicit transmit beamforming. If they do, maybe in like a warehouse environment or something, or some sort of big open environment where there's a lot of sensors, and there's going to have to be they're going to have to support the chipsets. They'll have to be AC chipsets, so they'll have to be 5 gigahertz, and they'll have to support the beamforming. But maybe, just maybe, we'll see a reduction in airtime consumption, which is the whole purpose of multi-user MIMO, is to get a reduction in airtime consumption. But once again, that's another, this could be a whole new topic. I'm not sure if somebody's speaking on multi-user MIMO this week, but that in itself could be a 2 or 3 hour lecture, because once again, that's a whole nother brave new world. But I could see where there might be some benefit for this down the road with IoT devices, but we'll see. Okay, it's right now it's just not a reality. Now here's another thing you're going to absolutely have to think about design. I always talk about wireless being layer 1 and layer 2, and yes, it is layer 1 and layer 2, but there's absolutely higher layer considerations, and including layer 3. And so I had hoped that I was going to retire before I was going to have to deal with IPv6. Yeah, well, that's not going to happen, okay? I'm already having to deal with it, and all the wireless LAN vendors are dealing with it, and most are fully compliant or almost fully compliant with IPv6. And bottom line is, if you have billions and billions of devices that are just stationary and they're just these little devices, they got to have an IP address. So the whole IP of everything, is back. Okay, it's coming back, and it's going to be an IPv6 world. Okay, it's pretty much a no-brainer. So I'm currently trying to learn more about IPv6 reluctantly, but currently, and I think all of us are going to have to, even though we prefer talking about spectrum analysis. Okay, now let's talk about management and monitoring. So we talked about it first from a design perspective, and now let's talk about it from management and monitoring, and then we'll hit the security side of things. So quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on this. Let's talk about how we've been monitoring and managing the handheld devices, the personal mobile devices. So this is another catchphrase, bring your own device, okay? Although the devices were originally intended for home use, it's consumer driven, they've been brought into the enterprise and into the workplace. And so now employees have expectations of using their personal devices in the workplace. So we live in a BYOD world, okay? We absolutely do, and most of you know that. So how have we been, one way that we've been dealing with this, is MDM. There's like 75 MDM companies, and it's based on the Google and the Apple APIs. But basically, you need an MDM solution to onboard these personal mobile devices, as well as maybe corporate issued devices. And then that can help you manage, secure, and monitor these devices. Now, some of the advantages of MDM, and then we'll talk about the downside of it, is you get secure over-the-air provisioning of these MDM profiles, where you can, as an administrator, restrict what your employees can and cannot do with their personal devices. It's also, to me, this has always been one of the big benefits of MDM, is it's an easy way to distribute the root CA certificates for 802.1x solution. That's instead of manually trying to install them. So that's one of the benefits, and you can do that over an SSL tunnel. Then once you have these things provisioned, you have, as an administrator, over-the-air management, no matter where they are. You have application management. And it's great and wonderful, but there's a lot of people that don't like MDM, and I like it in some cases, but in other cases, you know what? I'd rather have a simpler solution. I'm not talking about IoT yet. I'm going to get back to that in the next slide. I'm just talking about devices in general. There seems to be a trend now with all the wireless LAN vendors to come up with just simple onboarding solutions for mobile devices, personal mobile devices, simply to install the 802.1x root certificate, and sometimes the client certificate if you're using TLS, or in our case and a couple other vendors' cases, a unique private pre-shared key. Simple onboarding installation solutions that are simple to the end user, I think, are going to continue to be a growing trend that'll work kind of side by side with MDM solutions. Now, let's talk about this with IoT. Okay, IoT was not intended for MDM. Well, for one thing, MDM solutions are based on the Google and the Apple APIs. Okay, so and most of these devices aren't necessarily Google or Apple devices. So there's going to have to be different management solutions because we're starting to live in an IoT world moving forward. Now, I want to point something out. The whole consumerization of IT. A lot of this, most people, once again, this is something Marco and I were talking about last night. A lot of people don't really understand the concept of it yet until you start explaining it to them about what they might have at their home. So at my house, me being the Wi-Fi geek I have one of these Nest thermostats, which is like 2.4 gigahertz, okay? I got a doorbell, Wi-Fi doorbell. I have a Wi-Fi scale. Wi-Fi coffee maker, yeah, I know, okay, but you're starting to get a lot of these in the home. But once again, we're starting to see a push towards the enterprise, not necessarily to bring these particular devices into the enterprise, but you're going to start seeing, the enterprise adapt IoT in all kinds of machines. And probably the best example is the Apple TV, which was meant for, or the Google Chromecast, which was meant for home use, but you see them deployed in the enterprise now, especially in K through 12 education, quite a bit. So it is moving to the enterprise. Now, if you kind of look at IoT framework, it actually is multiple things. So you have basically a couple of layers here. You have the physical device itself, which does the sensoring, the monitoring of whatever you're trying to monitor, whether it's temperatures or whatever. And then as you move up the stack right here, you have communications and services, where a lot of this is where maybe APIs exist to actually get into an application block, which is your interface with the user. And the communication block right here and services block between the physical device and the application is where you have to think about management and security. Okay, so when you think of the application, that functional block usually resides somewhere in the cloud. So some sort of management application that's on the cloud. And the communication with the cloud is often done with RESTful APIs that use HTTP for transport. This is kind of a vendor-neutral presentation, but I do want to do one little plug for AeroHive here. Is in the next coming weeks, we're going to be announcing a lot of RESTful APIs for Hive Manager NG, our new cloud-based management platform, as well as coming out with NG version of our guest management solution, ID Manager. And we're going to make available many APIs for monitoring of client devices as well as your access points. And we expect there to be, we're going to create some of our own internal applications, but we highly expect there to be many applications with hooks into our management system. And as a matter of fact, we're going to have our own application store as well. So I view APIs, and I think a lot of you agree, for management as a really big part of being able to manage this information, and actually to manage the devices, monitor the devices in real time, as well as manage the information with applications that is coming. So big data is another catchphrase. It's a broad term for the data that's so large that traditional processing of the application information is just insufficient. The data sets are growing, they get too big, and if you have numerous and billions and millions and thousands and gazillions of devices sending you information, you got to have some way to data mine all that. And the good news is, if you have all this information, you can do predictive analysis that can be derived from that, so you can figure out trends on whatever kind of information you're trying to monitor across these IoT devices. AeroHive as a company, we view that big data as a big thing to also gather information just on Wi-Fi and what's going on with Wi-Fi, and might be able to do predictive analysis there in the future as well. Applications and APIs are going to be vital to IoT. So the last topic I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to ask Marco to come up here for a minute, and then we'll take questions, is IoT wireless LAN security. So, and this is definitely going to be an issue, and security has always been an issue, even though technically security has been fixed since 2004. The 802.11i amendment defines authentication and key management services. Basically, it's two components. You have to have a form of authentication, either PSK or 802.1x, and then you have to have some sort of dynamic, robust encryption, hopefully CCMP encryption, that are dynamic encryption keys that are generated by the four-way handshake. And most of you know this, but authentication is about validating identity, and then the encryption keys is all about data privacy to protect your layer 3 through 7 information. They're actually tied to each other. you cannot have encryption keys unless you have authentication. So whether you're using 802.1x or PSK, you go through that process. Then you do this little dance called the four-way handshake, and then you have your encryption keys, your unicast encryption keys. Now, what I want to focus on is authentication. So there's David Coleman, and let's talk about why validating identity and authentication is important. There's David Coleman, Wi-Fi geek, born February 1960. So yeah, I'm old. I get it. Okay. All right. So when I travel in airports, I need this passport. Okay, and that's how I get through the airports. And from country to country, I travel all over the world. There's David Coleman Headley, convicted terrorist. Okay, born June 1960. Okay, so because of this fine gentleman, every time I fly back into the United States, they pick up a red phone and they get a worried look on their face, and then this big security guard that's about 6'8" comes up and he's got 2 guns and he goes, "Follow me, sir." And we go to a room, and then I basically get drilled with questions for anywhere from a half an hour to an hour and a half until they figure out that I'm not David Coleman Headley, who, by the way, is in jail. Okay, they got the guy. Matthew Gass showed me online once. So you can go right here and you can see what prison cell he's in. But so anyway, I don't like this guy. Okay, so quickly, you guys know that 802.1x is the best way to go. It gives an authorization framework with a supplicant, an authentication server, and your AP is typically an authenticator. It integrates with LDAP. You need a layer 2 protocol for authentication, and it has to be supported on the client side on your radius server, and there's all kinds of different flavors of HEAP. And the ones that use tunneled authentication require certificates. And that's, without a doubt, the best way to go. Now, the problem with 802.1x is, even though it is the most secure method, and it is ideal for the enterprise, it involves certificates and a PKI. It can be difficult to deploy, and I'm not discouraging by anybody, not saying don't use 802.1x. You should use it if you have the capabilities and the skill sets, but it can be difficult to deploy and difficult to troubleshoot. And it's not necessarily a good match with IoT devices, and most IoT devices simply don't support it. So then you have static PSK. Well, that's great, 8 to 63 character passphrase, but it was never intended for the enterprise because A, it's susceptible to the offline dictionary attacks. There's all kinds of hacker tools. That's why the Wi-Fi Alliance recommends 20 characters or more. Additionally, the biggest weakness is that it's static. So nobody wants to use this in the enterprise because it's static. So that's why multiple vendors now support some sort of per device, per user, pre-shared key solution. My company is one of our biggest features, and customers love it. There's 2 other vendors that use some sort of PSK, I think Ruckus and Xeris. And to give you each device unique credentials. It's easy to deploy. It can be time-based credentials. It solves the static PSK problem. Now, it doesn't solve the offline dictionary attacks, and I'll address that at the very end of the presentation. But well, this is what it's all about, guys. 802.1x, yes?
So, okay, current MDM, let's say, have 100 smartphones, same PSK, push it through a profile done. Now, you're saying that the amount of IoT devices will be exponential. So now let's say we're dealing with 1,000 devices. How are you going to vision a unique PSK?
It's all going to have to be APIs, and it's going to have to be, there's going to have to be onboarding. Excuse me?
How will they get to that onboarding? Through a non-secure network? Through an insecure network?
So, I mean, to like provision the actual APIs?
The actual PSK.
A lot of these things haven't been worked out yet. So as far as I know, there's no real IoT to provision. First of all, if you want to, I actually talk about that in the next slide, but let's go ahead and talk about it now. First of all, provisioning a certificate is going to be tough enough because most of these things don't even have the flash to support the certificate. Okay. Secondly, I see your point. How are you going to securely provision these unless you have a certificate on the device? Okay, so and that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. So either A, these devices are going to have bigger flash, so we can set up an SSL tunnel to push a PSK or a root certificate securely over a pre-established SSL tunnel.
But a
Well, I understand that, but it might. But once again, there's also a scalability and ease of deploy things. I mean, so I'm not. Either way, I'm not saying don't use 802.1x, okay? I'm not saying that at all. And if you can do that, it's a great way to go. But in my mind, one of the advantages of private PSK for us is the scalability and the ease of use, the ease of deployment, okay? Look, there's a lot of guys here who have skill sets with 802.1x you're doing it have been a long time. A lot of people most people out there, not necessarily so. And that's one of the advantages of 802.1x. Let me just answer your question originally, and then you can hit it with a follow-up. So the original question is, how are you going to provision PSKs or certificates securely? Well, to these devices. It's going to be a challenge. Applications are going to have to be developed, and I would imagine the first generation of applications might not necessarily be a secure provisioning method. It might just be a quick way to do it. Because with guest users, things like that, they can go through a captive web portal, and captive web portals that everybody loves, and at least it's HTTPS, and then they can maybe provision it that way. But these are machines, so there's going to have to be an application. So there's challenges, and so I can envision the first versions of provisioning of is maybe a non-secure delivery. But until those devices actually have more flash, then maybe we can have a more secure delivery.
So basically, what I wanted to say is PPSK, right? And I'm not saying anything about .1x. PPSK also, I don't want to attack it. It's a good solution, but we have to understand the limits, right? PPSK is great when you have users who actually self-provision the PSK devices. Works perfectly, scales infinitely, right? There is no user to provision anything with it. There will be an admin having to provision all of those devices. So the PPSK model, where you just give PSK to user and say, go ahead and do it, it's not going to work here, because now I have 1,000 PSKs and 1,000 of devices, and be sure not to confuse. Right?
There's one big difference. .1x requires a supplicant.
I'm not talking about
there's one big difference. Either you have the supplicant, or you have by default the PSK, which is one and unique, and at least it's a uniform way. The provisioning will always be a problem, but at least you have one thing versus potential many things. So this helps in scale and administration to begin with. There's an inconsistency or the indefined provisioning end-to-end, yes, but at least you're starting with a consistent point that all devices support.
Well,
and that's the benefit.
All right, let's take it offline, because I don't want to grab time from everything else. But what I'm saying is, you're proposing a solution, and I really doubt this solution will actually work for this specific use case, because it only works well for it's only scalable for self-provision situations.
And that is across everything. That's not tied to PPSK or .1x. It's common. So you have a problem.
You have a problem either way, and that's kind of what we're discussing here. We have a problem either way, so it's gonna be, and actually, Marco, if you want to come up right now, and he's going to show you the problem. He has a problem right here, and that's kind of what the whole reason I'm having this is so we can have this kind of conversation. And these are the problems and the challenges that we face. Everybody, this is, if you don't know who this is our latest, just lost his face, but there he is. That's Marco. Marco's the newest AeroHive training superstar. He's a CWNE, and he's brilliant. We're glad to have him on the team. And he's just going to show you a very little quick demonstration of why these things are just so hard to manage. And
Okay, so I'm just going to show you.
Can you speak?
3, 2, 1.
Anybody hear Marco?
No?
There you go.
Hey, okay. Hi, my name is Marco Tischler. Thanks for the introduction, David. And I have one of these little buggers here, which I stole from David's coffee machine. It's an Arduino, and there's a lot of startups that actually use this type of boards first for their prototyping, but because it's so simple to use, they actually put it in their final product. And there's like wirelessly connected coffee mugs, toys, you name it. And the issue with this is that, so how do I connect this to my Wi-Fi once it gets to my home network? And they solve this with some simple instructions for those children, dads, moms at home that can do that themselves. Now, how do you do that? So there's two ways. Is the friendly way, where the device itself broadcasts an SSID, you connect to it, and hopefully you get to this friendly, non-secure, so HTTP portal, where you can configure your device. And it's going to ask you for your Wi-Fi credentials. The issue is, though, it's only WPA2 personal. That's it. It doesn't go much further than that. So no certificates, no .1x. I was searching for a library that would support .1x, and guess what? There is none. There are some custom-made supplicants by the community out there. They don't work, or how are you going to support those home-built libraries? So it's not possible. Definitely not scalable. The second way of provisioning is, this is low resolution. So there's a source code for my device here, and there's the SSID and password. So I have to change this in my source code, recompile, upload it to the device, and then it works. So this is how things are done in the consumer or home environment. Like David said, this is a problem that remains to be solved for the enterprise environment. And as soon as these guys come hitting in, so this guy also has an Ethernet port, right? You can use that as a way of connecting. But as soon as these guys hit the enterprise market and demand Wi-Fi connectivity, this problem is definitely will have to be solved.
So to the original question, the problem hasn't been solved yet. So we're speculating. Thanks, Marco. By the way, Marco's another Slovenian. I don't know what it is. We've now hired 3 Slovenians at Human Resources at Aerohive. We now have a rule, no more Slovenians. But
we like Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. Okay. All right, guys. I've exceeded my time, so I just need 3 or 4 more minutes. Keith. Okay. Okay. He's a lot cuter there, don't you think? You know, Gregor's trying to grow a beard too, so I don't know what it is. Quickly, this I don't know too. This is once again me just speculating. TLS tunnel direct link setup is something that Apple TVs use and Chromecast uses for direct communications. Even though the device is already connected to an AP, 2 devices can start kind of go off to the side and have sort of like an ad hoc network that exists within the basic service set. And there's actually a 3-way handshake, and that's actually how Apple TVs work. So a lot of IoT is also machine to machine. So remains to be seen, but maybe in the future might see a lot of TDLS between sensor devices. Once again, it remains to be seen. Quickly, the future of wireless LAN security, as I mentioned, the problem with PSKs, the biggest problem is static, and the per user per device solves the static problem. The other big problem with PSK security, and why it was never intended for the enterprise, is the brute force offline dictionary attacks. So the Wi-Fi Alliance has a group that is actually working on this. It's called the Secure Authentication of Equals, which they view as an eventual replacement for PSK. And basically, SAE is a variant of Dragonfly, which is a password authentication to key exchange that requires a 0 knowledge of proof. It uses a commit and confirm process that basically you know the credentials, but you don't have to really prove you know the credentials without really knowing them, without exposing them, I should say. And that solves the forging attacks, the modification attacks, and the brute force offline dictionary attacks. And then after you go through all that, after you go through this 2 authentication message exchanges, to guess the password and then confirm the password, then you can do your 4-way handshake and you're good to go again. So don't have a timeline on this. I asked Matthew Gass the other day about it, and he said they're working on it. Actually, SAE actually comes out of the 802.11s amendment, which was for mesh networking, and nobody uses the protocols defined by 802.11s because everybody does their own proprietary mesh. But this was something that was defined back then, and now it's going to maybe find its way back into our devices soon. So we'll see that. They're also looking at stronger encryption too, like possibly GCMP. But right now, this seems to be the next thing that we might see in the next couple of years. And the last thing I want to talk about is another proposed amendment, 802.11ah, which could be specific to MTM, machine-to-machine, and IoT, and that is 802.11h. Actually, this working group defines a whole new MAC and a new PHY, so it's a whole different frequency band. And in the United States, it would be it's called the subpar the subpar 1 gigahertz amendment, and in the United States, it would be in this band. In Europe, it would be here. Okay, it's ideal for low power consumption and long-range data transmissions. Supposed to be specifically for machine-to-machine and sensor networks. It's going to be a whole new MAC layer too, not just a new PHY, a new MAC layer. Its channels very small, 1 megahertz, 2 megahertz, and maybe even bigger channels for where there's more frequency space, like in the United States. And check this out: an AP with 8,000 devices connected to it. Okay. Yeah, we'll see about that. But I mean, but it's, like I said, it's a whole new Mac, so we'll see. Yeah, that'd be cool. Can anybody, by the way, a little trivia question. Some of you, no. Anybody here in this room can tell me currently what the 802.11 standard says for how many devices currently can connect to an AP? 2007. 2007, that is correct. Okay, so. Okay, yeah, good luck with that. Okay. But that's actually what the standard says. That's like one of those little geeky things you just tend to know, but in real life it doesn't exist. This is all about lower power consumption due to infrequent data transmissions based on the new MAC layer. And the packet size is very small, and then the data rates are at that minimum size. Any final questions before I wrap it up? In the back? What networks? LoRa, L-O-R-A. LoRa? Not familiar with that term. I know a girl named Laura.
No, L-O-R-A.
Okay. It's a lot like 802.11h? Okay. There's your answer. So the question was, okay. I'm not familiar with that acronym, LoRa. If anybody wants to go to the Google and maybe we'll find out. Yes?
From the perspective of capacity, so we're talking about, it's the latest marketing term. It was BYOD, IoT is the latest one. I kind of struggle to see that IoT, there'll be thousands of devices in the enterprise, it's going to be a massive problem. If it's a 2.4 gig only and it's B, it's obvious that it's going to be a problem. But if it's a 5 gig, there's sort of the amount of data that a lot of these devices send and how frequently I sort of struggle to see in a well-designed high-density network in your average office or other enterprise that it would be, particularly if, again, if it was a 5 gig.
So the question is, what you're saying is you don't really see this consuming a lot of bandwidth. Especially if they're operating at 5 gigahertz. I'm not so much concerned, well, two things, my answer to that. Number one, it's all application driven. Okay? That's one thing I've learned over the years, is all application driven. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have horrible traffic. And all they do is they build these new roads and bigger highways. And guess what happens? Cars come. And then now there's a new, bigger traffic jam. So they never solve anything. They don't put in a good mass transit system to actually efficiently move everybody through the city. They just build more roads, and the cars come. So every time we build bigger pipes, the cars come with internet. And that's been my way throughout the entire career. Now, your point is that these devices don't really eat up a lot of throughput or bandwidth. Well, it's application driven. So as these things get more robust, and I know that there's going to be engineering challenges with the chipsets, but as they get more robust, I think they'll carry more information. The second part of that answer to that question is the airtime consumption. Even if they're not carrying a lot of data, if they're on 5 gigahertz and even if they're communicating at 6 megabits per second, even if it's small and bursty, they're eating up airtime. And that's the biggest problem we have in this industry right now is it's half duplex and it's airtime. And I mean, that's why we only do things like 3 SSIDs now, because if you do more than that, the beacons eat up everything. So to me, I'm also worried about the airtime consumption. Did we have any more questions?
No.
No?
Thank you very much, David.
Okay, wait, one more thing. Everybody, we need to thank Keith for this, for putting this on. Thank you, sir. I was going to tell a Keith story, but I'll tell it later on because I'm getting kicked off. And finally, there's my co-author. He never comes to these events, so let's give him some crap. And everybody, if you do on your Twitter, we do the Where's Westcott. So,
Even on Twitter.
yes, that's it. Thanks, guys.